Hello! This is my first video that I'm doing for TikTok in a landscape format. It's also going to be probably a reasonably long video because this is my next part in my series looking at oddity clocks. And basically today I want to talk to you about why this clock is an oddity, or why clocks of this type are an oddity, and why they don't really have anything in common with either this or this. So this one here is your bog standard Clockwork clock. So this is a Clockwork 8-day mechanism. You wind it up with a key on the back, it ticks, and that's the main thing. One thing you can tell if you hear that by the camera, well, I can't now because it's stopped, but that is ticking. This clock is a quartz clock, and they also tick, though often not as loud. And the ticking is, certainly in the clockwork type ones like this, is to do with how they regulate time. Now, I'll put this quartz clock aside and bring up a clockwork mechanism. So this is probably a grandfather clock mechanism. It's a very big mechanism, but it sort of illustrates the principle of what was going on inside this. So this has springs that provide the power, and that's what you're winding with the key. The key in this case would fit on these and wind the springs up. This has two springs because it has chimes as well, or would have done if it wasn't in pieces. And then the ticking is caused by this. Now this would be a pendulum. There would be a pendulum attached to this. And if you look into the top of there, you can see a wheel that, as you move the pendulum back and forth, the wheel moves one click. Now that click essentially is what causes the clock to tick. And if I just wobble this from side to side, I can make it tick. So that's how those sort of clocks work. Quartz clocks are a little bit different. That uses oscillations of a quartz crystal and a bit of circuitry to drive like a miniature motor, but essentially it moves it in increments. It ticks. And that's what was inside this. This thing does not tick. And that's because that doesn't have anything in common with either of those two clocks. What it actually has most in common with, that I have, is it has a lot in common with this. Now this here is a very, very heavy synchronous motor. So this is a single phase motor, plugs into the mains, and it spins round at a speed. And that speed is dictated by the grid frequency, which in the UK is 50 Hz. So I think it might even say on this data plate just here, cycles, there we go, 50. So this is designed to run at 50 Hz. And at 50 Hz, this will run at 1500 RPM. It runs at a particular speed. And that speed is very, very reliable because the national grid do a very, very good job of maintaining the grid frequency at 50 Hz. So, synchronous clocks is what we move on to, which is what this quite spectacular Art Deco thing here is. Now, synchronous clocks were fairly popular in sort of the 1920s through to about the 1960s. After that, quartz clocks took over. Nobody wanted them anymore. So, synchronous clocks, the big advantage of them over a clockwork clock, something like this, that's an 8-day clockwork clock, means you have to wind it generally once a week. I mean, it's every 8 days technically, but it will stop after 8 days from fully wound, there or thereabouts. So you have to wind them every week. These you don't have to wind because they just run off the grid frequency. Because what's inside that, I'm not going to spin this around because it's very, very heavy and very, very delicate. But what's inside that is something like this. So this is actually a little tiny motor and gearbox. So if I put my finger on one of these gears, I can make the gearbox spin. And you can see in the end, there is a little flywheel And that motor will spin when you apply mains power across that coil. In fact, in this one it won't, because I took this out of the clock because the coil had burnt out. But if it was working, you put mains across it and it spins. And that spins at a very, very reliable frequency, because it is spun off 50 cycles grid frequency in the UK, and I believe most of Europe. I think the US is on 60. Japan's a bit weird because they use both. But in the UK, this will run at a constant speed, just like that huge synchronous motor I put down on the floor. This will run at a constant speed based on grid frequency. And that's why this clock is a bit of an oddity, because it is what's called a synchronous clock. So it runs off the mains. In this case, I've got it plugged into a test rig down here because I don't have a plug on it yet, because I'm still testing it to check that it actually does run okay and it does keep time. Now, synchronous clocks, I say, aren't really used anymore. That's a little bit of a lie. There are a few places where they are still used, mainly in timing applications. So if you happen to own one of these little plug-in timers that you can use to turn some lights on while you're away on holiday to make the house look occupied, you might notice on the back that it's got a little symbol there which says M, and that's because it's got a motor inside it, and the motor is designed to run at 50 Hertz. So this is in fact a synchronous clock. That's what this is doing. It's using the mains to provide the timing. And again, these are generally pretty reliable. This one's quite noisy, which is generally why I don't use it. But they are pretty reliable. They provide a good degree of time accuracy. Certainly better than a lot of cheaper, like this one's a very cheap, would have been a very cheap 8-day clock, 8-day Clockwork clock. So that was the other reason people bought into this idea, is because it was a more reliable method of timekeeping, as well as not needing winding. The other thing that grid frequency gets used for, which again is a little bit of an oddity, is these things. Now these, most members of the general public, you'll never see one of these. This is a machine hours run meter, and this is used on industrial applications to schedule maintenance. So they might run them on something like a water pumping station. They'd have these in the control panel. Whenever the pump's on, this thing's counting, and there might be, say, every 100 hours they have to do some maintenance on the motors or whatever. And this is to keep a track of how many hours the motors run. This is quite an old way of doing it now. It's generally all done digitally, but this is sort of how they used to do it with a synchronous clock, because that's exactly what this is. This is a synchronous clock. This is a synchronous clock, and this thing is a synchronous clock. And synchronous clocks are very, very different when compared to either Clockwork clocks or to Quartz clocks. Synchronous clocks are very much their own thing. They are completely different. Their method of timekeeping is so different to either Quartz or Clockwork. Essentially, Quartz or Clockwork, they use the same method of timekeeping. They have something that makes the hands move once a second, like this, in like a jerky motion. In this case, it's an electronic. In this case, it's a pendulum or some other sort of clockwork mechanical escapement. But that's why this clock and this clock will tick. This one will not, because what it's actually doing is it's rotating very, very slowly. It's rotating a gear somewhere in there at 1 RPM, and then another one at 1/60th of an RPM, and so on, to drive the seconds, minutes, and hours. And it does not tick. It just runs constantly. Like, if I turn this one off, if I could stop it and turn this one off, you wouldn't hear any ticking in this room, because this does not tick. What you hear is actually a very, very gentle whirring, and that's just the motor running. So I've been Barcroft Laboratories. This is my second bit of clock content, and I hope people like it. Bye.